And welcome back, everybody, to Cibolo Creek Conversations. My name is Wyatt Marchant. I'm here with Mr. Paul Wilson. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well.
It's been
How
a
about
while.
yourself?
I'm doing good.
I know. How long's it been
Like 2 months, probably.
since we recorded last?
Maybe close to it, at least.
Yeah,
Probably
easily.
mid-June.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that'll be about 2 months.
And we haven't seen each other just apart from the podcast very much in the last several weeks.
Yeah, staff meeting or two, but that's about it.
Pretty quick.
Yeah.
I've seen you on Sunday. We don't even get to visit much on Sunday. Both of us are kind of busy with the things we do.
Yeah. Yeah, you're just a little busy on stage.
But you're up in the loft helping with stuff, so you're kind of making some last minute changes for me and everything.
Yeah.
But we had a great lunch today.
We did indeed.
I don't know if it was because it had been so long, but man, my sandwich was just perfect. It just hit the spot.
Yeah, well, and I was starving
were
because
you?
I hadn't eaten breakfast.
Okay.
And so, and I'm, like I was telling you, I'm getting into running, and so I ran 2 miles, which for me is a feat. And so I was very hungry.
Yeah.
Very hungry.
What time did you run?
I worked out and then ran, so that would have happened around like 8:30.
Still pretty toasty.
Well, luckily I ran on a treadmill.
Oh, you were indoors.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was easier, but
Yeah,
still.
you know, I ran for all those years training, and I just couldn't bring myself to do any work on a treadmill. I mean, I did an occasional workout, but I would go bonkers on a treadmill or a stationary bike, for the bike part of that.
Yeah.
And I just, it would be hard for me to get motivated.
If I can get a good video that I can watch, it can distract me.
Okay.
And also, like I was telling you, I'm just trying to get my heart rate used to being higher for longer periods of time.
Right.
And so I thought was to start with treadmill and then move to road.
Get there.
Yeah.
Get there about October.
By then it'd be too dang late because I'm preparing for a 10K. So
yeah, but you're not going to stop once you do the
no, I
race.
won't.
No, you're not.
I actually,
I'm not going to let you.
I want to go run again now. It's like it's addicting. I don't like doing it when I'm doing it, but it's like I want to go do it again.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had that urge.
If you're gonna hold me to working out, then you got to start again.
You can hold me accountable. I got to get busy again. But
this guy runs an Ironman and just stops.
But I seriously, to train in the heat of Texas is,
oh gosh, yeah,
it's a whole other level.
When I work at the ranch, that's my heat cardio.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that.
Yeah,
It can be valuable.
Yeah, it's pretty unbearable though.
Yeah,
and I mean, even if there's a wind, it's like an oven. It's like whenever you open the oven,
right,
and it just
that
comes
hot
out.
air just
That's what a wind.
smacks you
That's
in
what
the
a wind
face.
feels like right now. Yeah.
So what's been happening with the podcast while we were gone? Were we posting old material or just not doing anything?
Basically a hiatus. I figured that, I don't know. There might be some people that get upset, but I doubt there's very many listeners that are like, "Why didn't you post one?"
Right.
And so we're just kind of going more loose with it. But we normally take a hiatus towards the end of the year,
Right.
and I figured that we could just be more consistent then.
Okay.
And kind of sub out,
make up some time.
And honestly, as long as I'm okay with doing it. Yeah, I don't have to have a hiatus.
Right.
A couple months that we don't do it. It's just whenever. I just don't want it to be an imposition on either one of us.
Right.
And so, and then obviously you were on vacation for a few weeks, and things got busy in my world for a couple.
Now, I understand you made a post about inviting people to ask questions.
Yes, so that was the one video that I did post, which was just kind of an explanation of why we haven't posted. But then also, we want to be able to allow our listeners to actually send in questions. Because, I explained in the video that a lot of the content that we actually talk about is from Q&A Sunday, which is where the congregation gets to send in questions. We don't get to all of them. But we kind of make our way through that after, a few episodes. And so, so this will be people will be able to actually go to like the description of the video or the description of the podcast and click on a link and then send in their question anonymously year round.
Okay.
So that'll live on every episode.
So
that,
we can
that link.
kind of build an archive of questions to work toward.
Correct.
And knowing that they came from listeners then helps assure us that we're talking about stuff that is of interest to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. And I figured it'd be a good resource so that way people could ask questions throughout the year rather than just having like the one Sunday to have that opportunity.
Right.
So So, yeah, I think it'd be really cool, and I also explain the video. Otherwise, I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
Not really guessing, like, I'm talking about things that I know will interest me and you, and I think
Who
other
may be the
people.
only 2 people.
Yeah, but I then, and it's like,
No,
but
my no, I've sensed that you have a really good sense of that kind of thing, and you've been asking some great questions that I hear back from some of our listeners, through different conversations, and I'm getting the impression that they're finding the content valuable and the kinds of questions are things that are of curiosity to them.
yeah. One of the problems with questions from, like, Q&A Sundays that they're so specific
Yeah.
that it's like one person's gonna be interested in this question, and so I can't
Oh,
ask
yeah.
that, like, we can't unless I can see it being, more broad, then
Right.
I'm not gonna ask that question
Okay.
in a podcast episode,
No,
you
that
know?
makes sense. Good.
But, we need to come up with some other avenue for our people to be able to get questions like that answered. Because 'Cause I'm guessing there's a lot of them that are very specific about a specific verse or something like that, that doesn't warrant an entire
Right.
episode, but
Sure. Sure.
maybe off the clock with one of us, just random questions being answered.
Chase us down in the hallways and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
corner
yeah.
us.
Maybe not me. Go for Paul.
No, you're a good thinker, and I'm sure you would have a good response. So what question do we have today?
Yeah, so today I think was kind of stoked by your sermon this past Sunday, which the time doesn't matter, but it's the question that we're gonna talk about today is, do Christians have to go to church? And now I know I'm in Paul Wilson's head, and it's like, well, the church isn't a place. I know. But whenever like do people need to go to a church? And maybe even explain that too.
Yeah. It's a really good question, and I would never want you to get inside of my head. I mean, you'd be so surprised. Um, but you're right. When I hear that question, I immediately, in the way that I think, I immediately say, well, we got to define some terms. Like, what does what mean? And so, can a person be a Christian and not go to church? Is that the question?
Essentially, yeah. That's
Yeah.
like the negative of it, but yeah.
Yeah. So let's define Christian, because I think there's at least two understandings of that, kind of culturally. So Christian is the broad category, and I break it out this way: there's churchgoers, and then there's Christ followers.
Mm,
I think that legitimately a Christian is a Christ follower, somebody who's by faith devoted their life to following the teachings and the way of Jesus. There are people who say, well, that's what I am, but you look at their life and it's not really ordered around a pursuit of following Christ. When you look at their life, it's really just sort of checking some boxes about religious activity. And particularly or namely, I go to a church on a Sunday morning and I do the hour and a half thing. So can a can a does a Christian need to go to church? That's their understanding. Do I need to go to that place on a Sunday morning and sit through the music, the prayers, the message? Um, so you have that. Those definitions, I think, are really important to the question. And then what do we mean by church? And again, I think there's kind of two sides to that. It's probably multiple sides to it, but two big sides to it. A lot of people think church is that formal, structured event that happens typically on a Sunday morning. And I go and I do the things. So I went to church. But that's not anything of what Jesus imagined. It's not what he sought to create. When he said, I'll build my church, he wasn't thinking anything like that.
yeah.
So the church, a church in the truest sense of the word, is a community of people who share a faith in Jesus Christ and with one another pursue living their lives like Christ asked them to. That's what a church is. And
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily meet in a building. It doesn't necessarily exist at a certain time of the week. It isn't It isn't really about programs and ministry designs and services. It's a community of relationship, and it may have some expressions or some experiences where they gather together for, worship and prayer and learning from the scriptures, but that's not the church. The church is the community. So that makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would encourage our listeners uh, to understand the distinctions for the conversation that we're about to have. So I know where I'm coming from. I think I'm pretty sure where you're coming from. When we talk about a Christian, we're talking about a Christ follower.
Yeah.
And when we talk about a church, we're talking about a community of faith that meets together in a local expression. And there may be multiple expressions of communities gathering together in an area. And Cibolo Creek's just one expression of the church. So, as far as a person, can they be a Christian and not go to church? If we're talking just about, the person whose understanding is only those formal structured expressions, then I'd probably say in their mind, they can think of themselves as a Christian and not have to do those things.
Yeah.
But I think that there'd be cause to evaluate if in fact their faith is sincere.
Mm.
Um, my answer to this question's actually evolved over the years. I think when I was younger, I might have said, yeah, you can be a Christ follower and not be engaged in a formal, traditional expression of structure of the church. But I think that's changed. And I've come to recognize the beauty of God's design for the community.
Yeah.
And if I understand the teachings of Jesus, if I understand the example of Jesus, if I understand the New Testament and what it models, I don't have any problem anymore saying it's impossible to thrive as a Christ follower without being surrounded by, engaged in, accountable to, and supported by a community of faith.
Yeah.
You can't do it on your own.
Correct.
You
Yeah.
you may think you can, you may rationalize that you're doing all right, but you are missing out on one of the vital catalysts that God designed to inspire and nurture our walk with Him.
Yeah, because I think that somebody can be saved and not attend church, right? But it's like going to an amusement park and, like, buying your ticket. Granted, in this metaphor, you have to give something, but it's like getting a ticket for an amusement park and then leaving. It's like you aren't even going inside to enjoy the new family that you're a part of, you know?
Yeah. I think, you look at Paul's discussion, the Apostle Paul's discussion in the book of First Corinthians, and he actually talks about the body, like the physical body, as an analogy to the spiritual body, the church.
Yeah.
And so, in that analogy, imagine a finger being severed from the hand. It's going to immediately stop functioning as a finger, and it will eventually die.
Yeah, the finger will suffer, but then so will the hand.
Exactly. But that finger
Yeah.
out there, laying in the street separate from the body, it can't thrive.
Correct,
It's
yeah.
not going to be able to sustain itself. And so I think a lot of people who try to do the Lone Ranger off on their own, private, independent, pursuit of Jesus, I think they don't understand how much life they lose not being engaged or connected to a body.
Go into that a little bit more, like, what for maybe somebody's listening who thinks that it's not necessary to actually attend church. What are some of the pitfalls? What are they losing out on? And what are some of the dangers I have some of my own thoughts. What are some of the dangers and pitfalls of that?
Yeah, this is just my observation. I'm just one guy. I've been at this for, you know, 35 years professionally, and then I grew up around the church, so since I was in the 3rd grade. So, here's just Paul Wilson's observation. I think that the person who doesn't attend church, isn't engaged in a church, I think they end up just they're they're kind of playing around their faith. They're not seriously, diligently, intentionally pursuing Christ. And they have all their excuses and all their rationale for why they don't fit or they don't connect or they got hurt or it's just a business or, what all all the critiques. Um, my observation from people I know who do that as a consistent expression of faith, um, they're not really pushing themselves to follow hard after Christ. They're kind of taking the easy way.
Mm.
They kind of, they kind of dilly a dally around their faith. And, this past Sunday we were talking about having just finished watching the Olympics. And then I was helping our church family understand that throughout the Bible, and particularly the New Testament, the idea of athletics and sports and athletic games like the Olympics are actually referenced in the scripture, and they become an analogy for spiritual pursuit. And if you look at the passages where those analogies are being made, it's directly inferring that the pursuit of following Christ, living in obedience to him, requires intentionality. It requires discipline. It requires structure, goals. It requires consistency. Again, just my observation. A person who lives independent of a church, my experience with those folks is that they're typically not quite as diligent, not quite as intense, not quite as consistent about their walk with Christ as I think Christ deserves because they don't have any accountability.
Mm.
They're not being called up or inspired by a community of faith that's asking that of them
Yeah.
or modeling that for them. Again, just my observation. So there's people who say, I have to go to church. I gotta go to church to be a good Christian. They're completely missing the point.
Yeah.
It really is more about I get to go to church. Um, I have the opportunity to meet together with my church family, and we're going to share together worship. We're going to bow our heads and pray together. We are going to sit together and receive the truth of God's word and challenge each other about our accountability to it. Um, I don't see the person out there living independently really engaging in those sorts of corporate expressions of what God designed for the body of Christ to offer Christians.
I think too, adding to that list that um, you also, I think every Christian has the responsibility to be part of a church, of a community of other believers.
Right.
Because like going back to the body analogy, like the finger, not only does the finger suffer, but like I said, the hand suffers too. The
Yeah.
rest of the body suffers because you aren't bringing your your spiritual gifts in the way that God has designed you. You aren't bringing that to actually aid the
Right.
body. It's
Right.
all just for yourself, or maybe in other ways that you interact with the world, but it's not actually bringing the body up at all.
Yeah. So in some ways, every person who lives that independent, private, anonymous spiritual experience, they've left the body handicapped
Yeah,
because of their unwillingness to contribute and to participate.
yeah.
And again, it might be a bit ethereal or nebulous to try to explain, but I think there is a life and a power and a enlightening that can some of that can happen privately in our pursuit of Christ, but I think some of that also happens in the context of the community.
Mhm.
And, you and I think we share a similar heartbeat that that whole idea of the community, the relationships, the connection, the knowing each other and being known, the loving and being loved is such an important part of the church. And it's one of my favorite things that we enjoy at Cibolo Creek. Uh, I think there's people who attend Cibolo Creek who encounter it from two different perspectives. I think there's people who come in and check the box. They kind of Sunday's really about the extent to which they engage. Um, Depending on, what their criteria is, they may like or not like what we offer on a Sunday morning. But I don't think you really experience Cibolo Creek and what makes it so wonderful and beautiful and unique until you find yourself connected to that family. And there's people that you don't just wave at and say good morning, but you know their name, you're involved in their life, they're involved in your life. And if you look at the folks who are experiencing Cibolo Creek in that way, I think they'll give testimony to a really wonderful and rich experience.
Mhm.
And I think we've worked hard at cultivating that. We work hard at inviting everybody into it. Not everybody takes us up on the invitation. But if I look at 28 years, I can look at 28 years of some really, really deep, intimate friendships forged in the context of Cibolo Creek. And in my mind, that's the best expression of what church is and what it offers.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the ways I've always said it is, and we've generally said this in terms of like our life group or small group ministry. I always wanted Cibolo Creek to be a place where people could find their 10 very best friends in life. You're not going to do that on a Sunday morning if all you do is come in and go out. But if you get involved in serving, or you get involved in life groups or some of the other connecting mechanisms of our church and really build friendships, um, it's possible that you could look around your life group and go, these are some of my closest friends
Mhm.
when it comes to trust, when it comes to authenticity, when it comes to love, when it comes to joy, when it comes to help and support and care. That stuff exists in our church in a really profound way. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in other churches. I'm just saying there's an experience at Cibolo Creek that's really rich and full, but it only exists for the person who's truly engaged in the life of our community, not just a spectator on Sunday morning.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another danger of not being involved in a church is that then you're left to grow in your understanding of the scripture and of God by yourself, which is can be potentially dangerous because uh, then you're interpreting scripture and you're interpreting who God is by yourself. We were talking about this at lunch. Like if you're just sitting there, I'm I can be wrong often, right?
Right.
And so, but if you're in a community where you can bring your thoughts and you can be led by those who have the gift of teaching or who just are more mature than you, who are just further down the path.
Right.
Um, you can be held accountable to correct doctrine.
Yeah. Left on your own, you're either interpreting it by yourself or you're consulting the internet.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the most reliable means by which one tests uh, the truth of Scripture. But being a part of a larger community that has, some definitions and a certain consistency in how it interprets the Scriptures and applies the Scriptures, then you have a way of validating if, in fact, the conclusions you're making are accurate.
Hmm.
And you don't really um, have that out on your own. The other thing is, again, I think people underestimate this, that out on your own, you're particularly vulnerable to the dangers of spiritual threat.
Mhm.
There's a reason why Jesus tells parables and talks about, the lost sheep, the one who wanders off. That sheep out there in the desert all by itself is particularly vulnerable to attack.
Yeah.
Where is he safest? He's safest in the flock under the watchful care of the shepherd. And I think that illustration is an extremely powerful one about the value of a Christian community. Um, yes, I get it. Some people, they're kind of lone rangers by personality. They might be introverts. They might have any number of a long list of offenses for why they don't engage in the church, but they're still out there on their own. They're leaving themselves really vulnerable to be seduced and carried away by the things of this world because they don't have a supportive community around them that can keep an eye on them, can encourage them, can at times confront them and hold them accountable to what they say they believe, what they are invited to do by way of following Christ. You just don't have anybody in your ear.
Yeah, there's no accountability.
No, asking you. And, accountability, it gets a bad rap sometimes. Makes it feel like somebody's, you know, micromanaging you. But accountability is just a trusted relationship where I can be honest with somebody and they can be honest with me. And in my honesty, if I tell you what's really going on in my life, which very few people do, like have complete, honest, open relationship, without at least a context for that, then people just live in a self-deception or they live in a really isolated loneliness and end up justifying and rationalizing all sorts of behavior that's not consistent with the call of Christ in their life.
Yeah. Well, and that's something that I think people have, I've heard some people talk about is that like on a Sunday morning, like a Sunday morning, like that's a corporate gathering where everybody's coming together. This gets to the point about how you can't just come on a Sunday morning and expect to grow really deeply because, like you just said, like people rarely share like how they're actually doing. They
Yeah.
always have the mask up, and it's like, well, on Sunday morning, there's like, between the both services, there's like close to 400 people that come through the doors. It's like, well, I'm not going to share everything going on in my life with all
Right.
of these people.
Right.
Of course, people are putting up a mask to a certain degree. It's like you have to be able to function in a large group of people.
Yeah.
Um, but it's those smaller gatherings outside of a Sunday morning. Not saying that Sunday mornings aren't important, but outside of a Sunday morning where that mask is more expected to come off at a certain point, whenever you start to feel comfortable with a group.
Yeah. So if we hold that true, then I'd say it isn't really about are you there on a Sunday morning? The question is really, are you connected to that kind of relational intimacy that allows you to have accountability and express vulnerability and receive input from others regarding your journey of faith?
Yeah,
Um, and then you look at serve one another, you look at pray for one another, encourage one another, love one another. You look at the idea of worship and the way that it worship really occurs and happens. And again, that's almost impossible to do on your own.
yeah,
So Sunday morning, it isn't about checking the box and saying I was there because you may find that other expressions of the life of that church are where you find that community, that connection, that accountability. But Sunday morning becomes the thing you look forward to as, wow, our family's having a reunion. I want to be there for that. I want to get together and worship God with them. I want to sit and receive the teaching of God's word and challenge myself. How am I doing? Am I pursuing Christ honestly in relationship to his word? It's really I like this idea that every 7 days there's this little mini reunion of your church family, and we all come from our different places and we settle in to a place and we we have this experience. That's what I want it to be. And I think that's where Sunday morning becomes an important expression of our faith is, well, it's the one place in the week where I get together with the family and kind of center my soul in anticipation of the week that's ahead of me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think especially, like, with 2, we are to praise God, and I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever watched a service online. I skip right through the worship part. I'm not gonna like, I don't like watching worship.
Right?
It's weird. I'm not gonna sing at my desk. What? Right?
Yep,
Like,
me too.
maybe in my car you can sing along, right? Like, people sing along to things in their car, but it's still not the same, right?
Yeah,
And
I'm the same way. I skip through the music because
yeah.
it's not engaging to me in that venue
No,
online.
no,
Yeah.
not at all. And so, I mean, that's something that you can't get unless you I can't really think of any excuse that you can't attend a Sunday morning, while Sunday morning, the corporate gathering isn't, the extent that one needs to be involved. But there's still no I can't think of an excuse not to attend it.
Yeah. Um, ever since COVID, which created this whole, demand for an online experience. And fortunately, we were in position to do that. We had already been offering online services before COVID became a thing. So we didn't lose a whole lot of time providing that for our folks. We didn't lose any time really. Um, we ended up doing that for what, 7 months before we were able to get back together. Whole sort of discussion about all of that. But um, it's interesting when I meet people who say, "Oh, we watch online, we watch online." And, this isn't true of everyone, but I'll ask them, "Tell me what that means you watch online." And here's one of the most popular responses I get. "Well, I have the computer up on the countertop in the kitchen while I'm preparing breakfast, while I'm washing the dishes, while I'm tending to the kids." And I go, "Okay, uh,
You're listening to a podcast at that point.
you're listening to podcasts, plus you're very fragmented in the amount of attention that you're giving to it." So I think ultimately that'll reflect then in the priority and the intentionality of your faith. It's going to be fragmented, it's going to be distracted. If that's your pattern over a long period of time. Now, I get it. People, they're out of town on business or they're really sick or, there's some other need for why they're at home on a Sunday.
Sure.
And that becomes a resource to them. My concern is not that. My concern is the person who said, "You know what? It's just easier for me to climb out of bed and stay in my pajamas and get my cup of coffee and make my bagel and eggs while I'm watching or listening to the service." And I go, "Mm, I'm not really sure that's honoring to Christ. Is that really what he's called us to do in the pursuit of him?"
It's funny that you kinda said that you bring up the live stream because, like, that's kind of my area on as
Right?
far as responsibility goes. And for a while, after I changed my position to what I am now, we were talking about ways that we can make that not necessarily the production better because that obviously makes sense, but more like, things that we can add about more community online,
More interactive.
more interactive.
Yeah.
And I've almost kind of leaned away from it
Okay.
just because, like, why enable it
Yeah.
more?
Why encourage bad habits?
Yeah. Like, there's a certain degree to where it's like, I want people to be able to watch if they're away or if they couldn't make it for whatever reason, they're sick. But,
Yeah.
like, that's a fairly low bar when it comes to, like, streaming. Like, you can
Right.
make that happen easy, but then anything beyond that, it's like, well, even if you live far away and you just love Paul Wilson's teaching, listen to it in the middle of the week, but find a different place,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I would say. We're grateful that if you find something at our church that's inspiring or helpful or, encouraging, that's wonderful. But if you live in, Montana, don't allow Cibolo Creek Online to be your church. You need to find a community of faith that you connect with, that you get engaged with, you build relationships around so that you can experience the body of Christ as it was intended for Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's super important.
Yeah.
Um, what do you say to people? I think one of the bigger pushbacks, especially with just kind of the North American, more affluent way of doing the formal church. What do you say to people who do say, like, "Well, it's just so business-like, like, what's all this fluff for?"
Yeah, I had lunch yesterday with a gentleman, had great discussion. He's, in his mid-30s, and he's really asking some wonderful questions about, the integrity of his pursuit of Christ and how it fits with his job and his family and his other things. So it was a great conversation, and I just admired I kept affirming that, here he is in his mid-30s, and there are not a lot of guys in their mid-30s that are asking the questions that he's asking and sorting out the the issues that he's trying to make sense of about, "I wanna follow Christ well." So that was a really great conversation, but he talked about that. He said, "I kinda lost a little bit of interest in active participation in church because it's so much like a business." And he said, "That's particularly been my experience or my impression of, like, mega churches." And I said, "You know what? Mega churches have a difficult history, and part of that difficult history is when you got tens of thousands of people, um, it's hard not to turn it into some kind of a business. And unfortunately, because of the nature of sin, when you get tens of thousands of people attending a church, a lot of crazy things can happen in hearts of leaders, and it can become about performance, and it can come about profit, and it can come about platform and all of that. Um, I'm not critical of mega church. I'm just saying they have some problems. But so do little churches, so, it's fair across the board. Um, but I was telling him, Cibolo Creek, there's a part of it that is it's a business because we have a staff, we have a lease on a copier, we have buildings, we manage people's lives and have different things we have to do to do that well. We have computers at desk. So there's a certain structure and a certain, sense of business that it takes to maintain all of that, right? I said I said, "That's not typically the way that I think about it. The way that I think about it is we're trying to coalesce a church family. Our family's growing, and we need a place to live. We need a place to function." Um, it's just by nature of some of the shared activities of a church is you need a place to land. And we did it for 6 years in rented facilities and it was okay, but eventually the rented facility said, "Sorry, you gotta go." And in our case, there weren't many options at all. But having a home for that family to exist in is important. It's necessary. And so when it comes to, our home that we live in as Cibolo Creek Community Church family, it requires some structure and some, disciplines in order to take care of the things that we have. So is my driving influence to create a great business? It's not. Certainly not for me. Paul Wilson's just not wired that way. Um, I'm not an executive kind of, type A driven leader. Um, but I recognize that in order to provide for this family, some of the structures that it takes requires money and requires, leadership and accountability and, professional accountability and policies and procedures and all that just to kind of make the operation work. I've always told our elders, I am not interested in building a corporation. My passion is to build a community. And corporations and communities function very differently. But communities also have expenses, and they also have to have structures, and they also have to have, policies and procedures. And so for the sake of our community, we've created some of that. I just work really hard to not let that be the tail that wags the dog,
Mhm.
to where um, everything is driven by, a business sort of metrics of success or, achievement. We take really good care. We're very careful about how the monies of Cibolo Creek are accounted for and how they're spent, because we recognize that they are the donations of the people who participate, and we want to be good stewards of that. But there isn't, there's no talk. There's no talk at Cibolo Creek, elders, trustees, staff, like, hey, what could we do that would turn a profit for us? That would, we could make some bank on this. It's just not, there's never a discussion about that. In fact, we're always working like, how can we do this with the gifts that have been given? How can we do this in the best way possible of utilizing those gifts to make as much of this ministry design free, basically, so that um, nobody's kept from participating because of some kind of financial thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I get it. Some people have a criticism of the church as a business because they've been a part of churches that operate a lot like businesses, and the pastor's a lot like a CEO. And the thought of ever, meeting him or spending any time with him or him knowing who your kids are, it's very unlikely because he has this very kind of CEO kind of persona to him, and he's kind of unapproachable. Again, that actually becomes harder to deal with when you got 10,000 people coming to your church. So, it's interesting. As a pastor, I've always wanted to see our church grow, not because of some, numbers race with X, Y, and Z church in town. That's never been any interest to me. I've always wanted to see it grow because we're offering a kind of community that's really compelling and engaging and people want to be a part of it. It's relevant. It's adding value to lives. So people tell their friends and their friends show up and find the same. And so it grows. I've always wanted us to grow that way. But at the same time, there's a part of me where I go, guys, this- we'll just take whoever you provide. And if this thing never gets really big, we'll just recognize it as a blessing. Because, I mean, you read the news like I do. There's a lot of ugly things unfolding in great big dynamic churches across the US right now.
Yeah.
And some of that's the nature of great big huge churches.
Yeah.
And so I've had this conversation with one of our staff members who tends to be very alert to those kinds of things. And I said, we've both just kind of compared notes and said, thank God Cibolo hasn't gotten great big like that. That maybe God's protecting us from some of the downsides of that whole corporate business like model of creating bigger and better.
Yeah. Well, it's like with all things. I mean, the more money you bring in, the more people. I mean, also that what comes with that is different temptations that don't exist in a
Yeah.
smaller,
Yeah.
or at least temptations to a higher degree.
Yeah. So going back to the original question, there's probably people who've been a part of business like churches and they found their heart hurt and they felt disappointed and uh, kind of disillusioned by it all. That's legitimate, but I don't think that's a good excuse
No.
for not finding a place where you can get engaged in a community of thriving Christians who are endeavoring to follow Christ.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on that and so many different things because it's like, okay, well, the only reason that it's a big deal whenever a church does that is because
Does
they
what?
misuses money, becomes too businesslike. It's because
Okay.
they 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 become hypocritical by the fact that their standard for themselves was broken by themselves. Like,
Right.
but they still have the standard. Whereas, like, the person who leaves the church because of that, they still go and engage with businesses all the time that are trying to make as much money from you as possible. And it's
Right.
like, well, okay, yes, but I mean, like, just because one church or one person in that church did things poorly doesn't mean that all churches are bad. Um,
Exactly.
and then two, like I like also like how you said that you're trying to create a home for the community. Like Cibolo Creek is trying to create a home for its community,
For our family.
for our family. Well, it's also okay to make the home actually feel like a home,
Yeah.
which means that like, and then there's a line where that becomes too much. It's like, well, are we spending all of our money on things for our people, you know, to almost make it, so bougie or so expensive, or everybody's getting handouts all the time and all
Right.
this stuff. It's like
Huge.
there's a line where that doesn't.
Yeah,
But at the
exactly.
same time, the people that would say, "Well, why are we spending money on that?" would also be upset if instead of the cushion chairs in the auditorium, we had cheap folding chairs to save money. They also wouldn't like those.
Right.
So it's like, well,
Or they would find another criticism.
yes. And so it's like the line is so weird, and a lot of times it's, yeah. And also, like, you have to look at yourself. It's like, okay, well, you're saying this about the church. How are you spending your
Yeah.
finances?
What's your house look like?
Yeah.
What kind of convenience and comforts are you providing for yourself, but then assisting, well, the church shouldn't do that. And it's, yeah. And that's why I think it takes really discerning, mature leaders to help keep a church honest and decipher through some of those, kind of hard to navigate tensions in all of that. Um, if your leaders are good people with good hearts and a sound understanding of why the church in general exists and why this church exists, um, then you're not going to make it all the right decisions, but you're just going to have a better probability of making wise decisions that reflect the good values and the heart of why you exist.
I think a good check to see if a church is being run more like a business than how a church is you can actually look at what they teach.
Mm.
Not even about money, but, like, I think a great testament to you is that in the face of money leaving, you didn't change what you said,
Mm.
right? Multiple times throughout Cibolo's history. And if you were business-minded,
Yeah,
you would have changed what you said
yeah,
because you
could
lost money on that decision.
afford to do it. Yeah,
Yeah. And so but if you look at churches that are huge and they're saying all the things that society likes and they're gaining people, it's like, okay, but at what cost? Like, you're probably more business-minded if you change what you say or if you're saying things in such a way to not be offensive. You're
yeah.
you're
No,
probably look you're yeah.
no, I would say that's true. I think there's also some other common topics that you can look at as sort of the consistent fare of what's taught in the church that suggests business-like versus community-like. Um, I'm a big fan of leadership. I think the church should be led well. There's some churches, they're just overboard on the leadership speak. And you look at their message series, intensely leadership, intensely intense sort of, calls of people to action. Um, they do a lot of teaching on financial stewardship. They're wanting to help people, but basically they're driving again and again, again, they're driving this theme. You need to be giving us your money. And that's just stuff, leadership, financial health and financial stewardship, and a couple other themes, the themes of generosity, themes of sacrifice. It all always comes back to that money thing. And if you're in a church where that's just the kind of the standard fare of topics in the course of, a year's worth of sermons, there's probably either a real thirst for money or a real need for money because they're so overextended. They're trying to catch up. So they're looking at all the different ways they can drive people to giving.
Yeah.
And s so that's been an interesting topic at Cibolo Creek. I'm not afraid to talk about money. I determined I wasn't gonna talk about it all the time. We've been 28 years, we've never passed an offering plate. We've always allowed people to choose their participation in life of the church. That has some good sides and bad sides. Um,
Oh, quick point on that.
yeah.
I know people who nobody in my family are, like, close to me, but, like, I know people who have attended Cibolo and questioned the business-like aspect of it because they've received, like, a cookie or some kinda treat on the way out. But they also would have been upset if you passed an offering plate. There's no winning.
There is no winning. You'll find as a participant in the church, as a minister, there's a sense to which there's just no winning. So many different expectations. Um, I forget what point.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, that's all right. Um, yeah, so we've always been careful about how much we talk about it and how we talk about it and how we invite people to give and how we make our needs known, to where we just don't become this, this constant drum that we're always beating. And there's been seasons where our leaders have looked at me and said, Paul, you need to talk about it more. And some of that's been legitimate because I could go long, long time without ever talking about it. And then I've also pushed back and said, well, our our giving stewardship strategy is not going to be it's all on my shoulders to talk to it. What are the other tools? What are the other resources? What are the other voices that are being perpetuated in the life of our church to remind and invite people to the opportunity of giving? And we've done a lot of work on that in the last 2 or 3 years of trying to spread out how it's communicated and who's communicating it, so it's just not on my shoulders to make the plea, because that's just so uncomfortable for me.
It's also nothing worse than being a first-time visitor and it being the money talk day.
Oh yeah, I hate that.
Like, that's because those people always leave, "Yeah, they talked about money." I'm like,
The
"Ugh,
one Sunday I go, they were talking about money.
oh,
It's
no."
like,
It's like, "Well, he doesn't normally talk about money." "Yeah, but they talked about money." I'm like, "But it's not like you just got
it's been
unlucky."
4 years since I talked about money. You showed up on the one Sunday. I have a funny story. This isn't about money, but there was a woman who used to come to our church, and she wanted so much for her husband to attend our church. And so I think it was, I don't know, I can't remember what the case was or the cause was, but she came up to me and said, my husband's coming to church today. I had no idea. So it's not like I planned a message for him. And my message that day was had to do with the parable of the lost sheep. So I delivered this message about, people being far from God and God looking for them and the whole thing. So I saw her the next Sunday after that service. I said, tell me, how'd it go? What'd your husband think? Oh, he hated it. I'm like, why? He said, well, he felt like you were, making him feel bad because he's lost and all that. And he felt like you were, just typical preacher. I'm like, "Jeez." I'm not lying, Wyatt. It was maybe like 7 years later. She's like, oh, my husband's coming to church today. Guess what I was speaking on? Parable of the lost sheep. I mean, totally random. I had no way of knowing.
Yeah, that's a God thing, and hopefully he was convicted.
And so here I am churning through this message thinking, oh, he hated it the last time. I wonder what it's probably not any different this time. I never did find out what he thought about all that. But yeah, there's, when I do the occasional either the message or the series of messages about financial stewardship, and we're going to talk about money, and eventually we're going to talk about generosity and giving. I dread the first week. Absolutely dread. And I think if you went through our archives of messages of those series, I bet you every one of them starts off with this huge disclaimer that if you're here today, this is the first time I've talked about this in a long time, and I'm not here to yank you around about your money. And we rarely talk about this. And we're probably the only church in town for 28 years who's never passed an offering plate. So I'm making all these disclaimers like, come on, you got to give me some grace here that this isn't all we talk about.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right. There's a lot of people who will just say, yeah, we talked about money. I'm never going back.
Yeah, it'd be like, but I mean, there's a certain necessity to it because it's like, my friends come over to my house a lot, and I let them go in the pantry and eat whatever they want.
Hmm.
But at a certain point, they can't just keep eating all my food. They have to start bringing some back, or at least Venmoing me something, you know? It's like, okay, well,
Uh,
you can like, if you're gonna be part of this family, well, at least,
contribute.
contribute a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so, yeah, I get that about the money thing. But, yeah, that turns off a lot of people, but, it you know
Yeah, and so, like, a different criticism that I hear a lot about is somebody had a bad experience.
Mhm.
They got hurt by something the church did or didn't do, something the church said or didn't say. It might not even have been the pastor, but somebody else, hurt their feelings or did them wrong. And that's really sad. But then they'll use that for the rest of their life as the reason why they don't engage. And I that's really unfortunate that they make that decision and miss out on so much of what a really healthy, thriving, wonderful body of believers can be like and what it provides to their life.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's no, like, that we talk about, like, the spiritual attack. I think that justifying your non-engage or your lack of engagement in the body, um is actually a spiritual attack. Maybe not all the time, we can just do it ourselves, but, like, there's nothing the enemy would want more than for you to justify never attending a church again
Sure,
because of one person or one bad experience or
sure.
whatever.
Yeah,
Because
that's a victory
yeah.
for the dark side, if you would.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the wolf cornering the one sheep by itself.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, the person who's been hurt, they refuse to see it that way. They just feel justified in their victimhood and again, just my personal observation is then they just fly under the radar and take the easy route of following Christ and never really lean in and push hard about following Christ according to the design that he created, which was a church family, a church body that they're engaged.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of different reasons, but I think, when you get down to it, it really isn't whatever the thing that is, like, stated first is often not the actual reason,
Yeah.
is what I've found. And the same reason of, like, I've yet to meet somebody who just claims that they don't believe in God, and, like, the creation story is really the issue that they're hung up on.
Mm.
Like, I haven't met that person where the Big Bang is the deciding factor.
Right.
It oftentimes just isn't. It's just something it's an argument, might be a smaller factor, but it oftentimes isn't the main thing
Right.
if you really dig down deeper into it.
Yeah. How do I say this? It's really unfortunate that there are some very unhealthy Christian communities.
Yeah.
Um, people because of sin, we end up doing lousy stuff. In some churches, they just are toxic and they have a really long history of broken, dysfunctional, family as a church. I mean, it's just, and they're out there. And I guess from the seat that I sit in, I know how hard it is to create something that's healthy and mature and thriving. And while we don't get it right all the time, we're certainly not perfect. There's generally a healthiness to what we've created and how we go about, preserving it. Um, so I do believe that really great church families are out there, and somebody just has to be diligent to find that place where they connect and they then feel like they belong.
Yeah, and that's the hope. Like, even you even said it this past Sunday. It's like, hey, if Cibolo Creek isn't doing it for you for whatever reason, and please go find one that does. Because, like,
Yeah.
that's the ultimate heart of what we want. It's like, just
Yeah.
go get involved in a church.
My heart as a pastor is I don't care if you come to our church. I care that you're engaged in a church.
Yeah.
And, Cibolo Creek has enough uniqueness to its mission, its vision, and its, ministry style. It's not for everybody. And, the challenge we've faced, it, it can go either one of two ways. or I guess there's 3 or 4 ways, but one of the 2 ways is, I really like the preaching, I hate the music. Or I really love the music, the preaching's I wish it was more hellfire and brimstone, I wish you'd turn the screws tighter. The other kind of tension people live in is, I really like the church, it's just, there's a particular ministry program that it doesn't offer for my, college age single or my student or my child, that's to their liking or to their satisfaction. Um, and so we have people who might come to our church and, they tolerate the music. We have it's crazy to me. We have people who will refuse to come into the auditorium until the music's done, those, because they're so, and I'm just like, really, if you're that miserable, surely there's gotta be another place in town that plays the music that will, thrill your soul and attract you to worship. And so, probably in the early days, I would have been afraid to say what I said this Sunday because I've been nervous about us getting smaller rather than growing. But I don't feel that panic anymore. I don't feel like that really drives me anymore. And so, yeah, I just say, if you're not happy at Cibolo, if we're just not really cutting it for you for whatever reason, just find a church where you can be excited and be engaged and be encouraged in your journey rather than sitting there miserable Sunday after Sunday. Because eventually that miserableness, it it overflows and somebody gets infected by it.
Yeah.
It's the criticism, it's the relentless critique of everything that we do, and the complaining and all that. And we're just like, that's not good for you. That's not good for us. So please, we want to serve you. We're going to do our best to provide a really wonderful experience in keeping with the calling that God's placed on our church and the style that we've decided best serves those purposes. But if it's not for you, there's too many other great churches in town for you to check out.
That's back to the hand finger analogy. That's the finger not getting cut off, still attached, but just refusing to move. It's like, well, it's not any good.
You're not helping us here.
That also goes into too, though, like a consumeristic mindset of you.
What's in it for me?
What's in it for me? And so it's like, you ask the staff a question of like, what's the number one thing that you look for in a church? And it's like, well, for me, it was doctrinal alignment. It's like, if that's not there, well, then the other things,
Doctrinal?
doctrinal,
Doctrinal.
doctrinal.
Did I catch you in a word?
Apparently. I have them all the time. I just say words that don't exist, but they sound fine, so
But if
nobody
you
calls
go
me
in
on them.
strong and confident, nobody knows,
Yeah, I
right?
say conversate all the time. Nobody ever. It's not a word.
Conversate.
Yeah, but it should be.
Okay, back to your point. You look for
Yeah,
doctrinal
doctrinal
alignment.
alignment, because it's like, if that's there, then if that's not there, then the other things like, we
Right.
might be able to be great friends, but you don't believe in the Trinity, so it's like, what are we doing here?
Yeah. Exactly.
And so a lot of people do just look for the more like, either what's in it for me way of looking at a church.
Yeah,
And those people are often the same people that like come in, come out.
sure. They they have a very consumeristic mindset to where I'm just shopping, I'm coming in, I'm picking something up quick on the way home. And um it's just a different level of ownership. Um
I kind of blame the American church for that to begin with, though.
yeah.
I think we've kind of catered to it to a
Oh,
large degree.
I think we spent the 90s catering to it and holding it up as a model. Um, and so there may be sense where we're kind of, paying the piper right now in the backwash of that. But
But that's also like, that's that weird line of like, when are you doing something to be attractional? When does that go too far?
yeah, yeah, churches in the 90s really struggled around becoming these entertainment centers to just draw a crowd. I'm not oppositional to the attractional um, methods, but you gotta. It's like what are you doing with it? Why are you doing it? How much are you doing it? To where the point where you just become an entertainment center versus we occasionally do these high attraction events as a way to engage people who perhaps would not engage with us in another expression as a way of directing them into the opportunity to be a part of our family. So, um, feeding students pizza, maybe an attractional method, um, game nights or, the fun sorts of things. They're attractional methods. I think they serve a purpose. They create impressions and they cultivate connections. And that first impression and those connections are huge levers to engaging people. So they have a place, they have a purpose until they just again become the tail that wags the dog.
Yeah.
And yeah, in the 90s, that was really popular.
Yeah. Also depends on, like, where your church is situated. 'Cause it's like, I'm not gonna run, if Cibolo Creek probably wouldn't be run the same way in, you know, some really poor part of South
Right.
Texas or Africa or something like that. It wouldn't be run the same way.
Yeah.
People around aren't there's no need there's ways of reaching out to the community even in just how you set up your building and what you do, that you wouldn't have to do in a place where that it's not expected
Right.
to a certain degree.
Right.
And again, that can go too far, but,
So going back to the original question, can you be a Christian and not attend church on and that question implies the Sunday morning experience. I'd say yes, you can be a Christian because genuine conversion is not based on works. It's about a sincere faith in Jesus Christ. So I'm not going to attach attending church as the one work. The same with baptism or communion. I wouldn't attach those things as this is required. Um, I'm just going to say you're not going to thrive in your walk with Christ out there on your own, independent of a community of faith.
yeah,
You're not going to be able to really seize all that God's church was designed to provide with you being excluded from it.
I agree. Yeah, God doesn't require that of us. I would say that he expects it of us, though.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you take the definition, the Christian is a Christ follower, then a Christian is paying attention to the scriptures, what they teach as a design for our lives as disciples of Jesus. And I don't think you can be an honest student of the scriptures and not see the place of community and connection to a body, a family of believers. And so, if you're going to be an honest Christ follower, then you have to submit yourself to that design. And it may not be your favorite thing, and you might have been hurt along the way, and whatever. But as an obedient follower of Jesus, you're going to find that place where you're surrounded by a group of Christians who are helping and supporting and encouraging you in your walk with Christ, and you with them.
Yeah,
So, um, the person who crosses their arms and stubbornly resists that design, I think we got some major issues of the heart about what it means to be a disciple of Jesus.
yeah. Because you also notice that those people never use scripture to justify their decision. Because like you just said, you can't be an honest student of, say, the New
Yeah,
Testament and
show me the verse.
come away being, "Yeah, I can do this by myself." Yeah,
Yeah, show me the verse or verses, just the theological pattern that would suggest that early first century Christians thrived out on
yeah,
their own.
yeah.
It's just not there.
And hiding from the authorities is not an acceptable answer because
Right.
they were dying,
Right. In fact, because of the persecution, they were driven together
together.
because
Yeah,
they needed each other to survive.
yeah,
Yeah. So that's I mean, at the bottom, as a bottom line, that's how I answer that. A genuine follower of Christ pursuing an authentic relationship with him in obedience would understand from the teachings of Scripture that they are to be engaged and involved in a community of faith with by where they find all that the church was intended to bring.
Yep, I completely agree. And going into that, expect to be let down from time to time, to disagree from time to time.
Yeah,
To you know,
you don't have a New Testament without the fact that people were let down and there was disagreement. I mean, all the letters were written to some sort of, issue in the life of the church, but there's never a sentiment in the New Testament letters like, well, this is all screwed up, so just hang it up. Just go
well,
on your own.
and that's why you know the church is called a family so often because
Yeah.
it's like, well, I can't just because me and my wife get into an argument doesn't mean I can be like later. I mean, I guess you can with no fault divorce, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean? Like you
Yeah, a
shouldn't.
family
Yeah,
has conflict. They have misunderstandings. They do stupid stuff.
but you work it out.
Hurt each other's family, but the nature of the family is we're committed.
Yeah.
So we work through, grow through, and become better, healthier, stronger for it. But most people, they don't give the church that kind of a place in their heart, is to say, no, this is my family. I'm sticking with it.
Yeah.
And I've received a couple of really nice letters through the years of people who've essentially written that is, I made a decision that Cibolo Creek was going to be our church family. And in those moments when something happened I didn't necessarily agree with, I refused to leave.
Yeah.
And I continue to offer myself a positive and helpful and supportive sort of participation. And they benefited from that. They came to understand a lot of wonderful things about the design of God because they stuck with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think too that leaders being approachable and available to people who have those disagreements to be able to go talk to them. Like I know you have lunch people all the time. I think that's really important too because a lot of people will just get mad and be mad in the dark without telling anyone.
yeah.
It's like, well, you
Yeah.
could have just go like, I know that not everybody is as comfortable just going and like talking to you because there's some people that are like, that's the pastor. And it's like,
Right.
okay, no, that's Paul.
Just
It's
Paul.
just Paul. Every time I'm on the stage, I roast the guy. He's okay to approach. And so, but like seriously, you can go and just talk to leaders of a church about it. And I know that not all leaders and all churches are approachable, but it is important for that. So if you have an issue, go and talk to somebody about it. Don't just sit on it and,
Yeah, go and talk with it in a good spirit.
Correct.
Talk about it in a good spirit. I think, again, that's part of the design of Christ for the church, Matthew 18, and a host of New Testament passages about bearing with each other's burdens, offering each other grace, working things out, and offering forgiveness and understanding. Those are all part of the design because Christ knew that as human beings, we'd get ourselves sideways from time to time.
Yeah.
But again, it would be impossible for you to show me a biblical argument for why you now have the permission to go and do church on your own and live your life as a Christian without it. It's just not there.
Yeah. Yeah. In the New Testament church had the best reason, which was, put your head down. Don't let anybody know you're a Christian and stay alive.
Yeah,
But even as they were all dropping like flies, they were like, no, we got to get together.
Yeah.
So.
Very good.
Very good indeed.
Good to be back.
It is. And I guess we'll be back next week.
All right. I look forward to it.
Indeed, me as well.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Thank you. We hope you enjoyed this presentation of Cibolo Creek Community Church. If you did, please consider supporting the ministry of our church. Your donations make a difference. To check out more resources or to share a gift, please visit us at cibolocreek.com. Thanks for listening.